The signal was not supposed to exist. Captain Nadia Osei had been running deep space survey routes for 11 years, and she knew what dead space sounded like. Dead space had a sound, not silence exactly, but the low, even hiss of background radiation, the cosmic static that filled every frequency when nothing was transmitting. She knew that sound the way a sailor knows calm water. And what came through her sensor array at 3:40 hours in a corridor of space that had not been charted in 60 years was not that sound. It was a pulse, clean, repeating, 7 seconds on 3 seconds off. Over and over, identical each time, like something that had been doing this for a very long time and had no intention of stopping. She pulled it up on the main display and stared at it for 4 seconds before she understood what she was looking at. Then she felt the specific cold that comes not from fear but from recognition, because she had heard this frequency before. Not on a mission, not in a training file. At her grandmother's kitchen table 32 years ago when she was 9 years old and her grandmother was explaining what she had done for a living and why she had stopped. The frequency was 847.3 megahertz. Her grandmother had called it the grief channel. It was the emergency beacon frequency used by the Earth Boundary Authority's Deep Space Survey Division from 2287 to 2301, a 14-year window before the authority switched to the modern relay standard. After 2301, no vessel used 847.3. The equipment was decommissioned. The frequency was officially retired. It was listed in the authority's historical archive as inactive, which was a word that meant nothing out there should be broadcasting on this anymore. Something was. Nadia locked the signal and ran the triangulation. The source was 2.3 light hours away, deep in a debris field that the charts marked as the remnants of the Karev Survey Expedition's last known position. She knew that name too. Everyone in the authority knew that name, the way sailors know the names of ships that went down in storms that shouldn't have been survivable. The Karev Expedition had departed in 2298 with a crew of 14 and a mandate to chart the Helios Drift Corridor. They had sent 3 transmissions, then nothing. The authority had searched for 2 years and found no wreckage, no survivors, no explanation. In 2301, they had filed the case as lost with unknown cause and had closed the file and had moved the frequency to the inactive list and had tried with varying success to forget. 60 years later, 847.3 megahertz was pulsing in the dark, 7 seconds on, 3 seconds off, in the exact debris field where 14 people had vanished. Nadia did not report it immediately. This was a decision she made in approximately 12 seconds, which was the time it took her to understand that reporting it would produce a response chain that would take days, and that whatever was broadcasting in that debris field had been broadcasting for 60 years, and that whatever it had been waiting long enough. Oh, she set the heading herself. The transit took 4 hours. She spent those 4 hours in the records database, pulling everything the authority had ever filed on the Karev Expedition: the original mission briefing, the 3 transmissions, the search report, the closure filing. She read them in order and she read them carefully, and by the time the debris field appeared on her navigation display, she had read them twice and had found the thing that she suspected she would find. The thing that the closure filing had buried in a footnote on page 41 of 47. The thing that the person who wrote the footnote had clearly considered too speculative to include in the main body of the report. The footnote said, "Secondary analysis of the third transmission's carrier wave indicates the presence of a subfrequency pulse at 847.3 MHz embedded in the standard broadcast. The pulse pattern does not match any known emergency beacon protocol. Its origin is unclear. Further analysis was not conducted due to the closure of the active investigation. Further analysis was not conducted. 60 years, 14 people. A pulse that someone had noticed and filed in a footnote and not pursued because the investigation was closing and the frequency was being retired and everyone had already spent 2 years looking and found nothing." Nadia read the footnote 3 times. Then she looked at the debris field on her display, which was growing larger as the meridian closed the distance, and she thought about what it meant that the pulse was still going. beacons ran on power cells. Power cells had lifespans. The Boundary Authority's standard emergency beacon in 2298 had a power cell rated for 30 years. Whatever was transmitting in that debris field had been transmitting for 60. Either someone had replaced the power cell, or the power source was not a standard beacon. Brisfield resolved on the close-range sensors as she entered it. Scattered wreckage, hull fragments, equipment casings, the distinctive silhouette of a drive core that had not detonated but had simply come apart along its stress fractures slowly over decades. The Karev Expedition's survey vessel, or what was left of it, distributed across 300 kilometers of drift. And at the center of the debris field, whole, intact, dark except for one blinking light on its forward array, a secondary module, an escape pod. The kind rated for 30 people and designed to detach from the main vessel in an emergency and sustain life support for 90 days. 90 days. The pod had been out here for 60 years. Nadia brought the Meridian alongside and ran a bioscan before she did anything else, because she needed to know, and she needed to know before she opened anything. The scan took 40 seconds. 40 seconds in which she did not breathe the way she normally breathed. 40 seconds in which she looked at the pod's blinking light and thought about her grandmother's kitchen table and the way her grandmother had said the names of the Karev crew not as a list, but the way you say names that belong to people who mattered. The bioscan returned a result that made her hands stop moving for a moment. Two life signs, faint, slow, but present. She docked. The pod's airlock cycled with the specific reluctance of a mechanism that had not been used in a very long time, but that had been maintained well enough to still function. The interior was cold, not the cold of life support failure, but the deliberate cold of a system running at minimum capacity, conserving every unit of power for the things that absolutely required it. The lights were on emergency amber. The air recyclers were running at 15%. And in two of the pod's 30 suspension alcoves, 2 people were alive. Not in suspension. The alcove suspension systems had failed at some point. Nadia could see where the components had been cannibalized, stripped out, and used for something else. The 2 people in the alcoves were simply there in the amber light, in the cold, in the slow metabolic state that extreme cold and extreme stillness produce in human bodies over very long periods. Alive, barely, but alive. The medical system Nadia carried was designed for field emergencies, not 60-year hibernation cases, and she knew this, and she worked with what she had, which was what the situation required, and she was good at working with what she had. She started the warming protocols. She established basic fluid lines. She monitored. And while she monitored, she looked at the pod's interior and began to understand what she was seeing. The pod had been modified, extensively, over decades, by someone who knew what they were doing and who had worked with extraordinary care and extraordinary patience. The suspension system had been converted into a power generation array, crude but effective, drawing on the thermal differential between the pod's interior and the void outside to trickle charge the beacon's power cell. The food stores had been rationed across decades and supplemented by a hydroponic system built from pod equipment and emergency kit materials that should not have been sufficient for what they were being used for, and that were, by every visible measure, insufficient, and had produced food anyway. The air recyclers had been jury-rigged and re-jury-rigged and re-jury-rigged, the repair history visible in layers of modification, each one slightly more sophisticated than the last, each one produced by someone who had run out of one solution and invented another. Someone had been keeping 2 people alive in this pod for 60 years. And on the wall beside the beacon controls, in small, careful handwriting that had been maintained in a log that filled 6 emergency notepads and 312 improvised pages made from flattened packaging material, was the record of how. Nadia read the first entry, then the last. Then she sat in the amber light in the cold and understood what she had found. The log was written by mission specialist Dr. Nadia Osei. Same family name, not a coincidence. Nadia's grandmother had served on the Karev Expedition as mission specialist before transferring to a different assignment 6 months before departure. And the replacement they had found for her, the person who had taken her seat on a mission that her grandmother had spent the rest of her life thinking about, was a cousin third removed, whose name Nadia had known since childhood as the name of someone who had not come back. The log began on day 4 of the emergency, after the event that had destroyed the main vessel, an encounter with a debris field moving at a velocity that the charts had not predicted, and that the ship's collision avoidance had not been fast enough to handle. The main vessel had been struck and had come apart in minute. Why seconds? Nadia Osei had been in the secondary module when it happened. She had sealed the airlock and detached and watched, through the pod's forward viewport, as 14 people's home became wreckage. Of the 14 crew, 2 had made it to the secondary module. Nadia Osei and the expedition's navigator, a man named James Ape, who had been injured in the collision and whose injuries were, in the log's first entry, described in clinical terms that made clear Nadia Osei had medical training and was using every bit of it. The log's first entry ended with, beacon activated on 847.3. Standard rescue protocol, 90-day life support, will conserve everything, someone will come. 90 days came and went. No one came. The log recorded this without drama, the way you record facts when drama is a luxury you cannot afford. Day 90, day 100, day 120. The modifications began on day 103 when it became clear that the life support was going to run out before rescue arrived and that the options were to let it run out or to change what was possible. Nadia Osei chose to change what was possible. The first modification was to the power cell, a thermal coupling improvised from hull insulation and 2 components stripped from the navigation array. It extended the beacon's life by an estimated additional 40 days. Not enough. She modified again and again. The log became, across its 312 improvised pages, a technical record of a mind that refused to accept the limits of what it had been given, that looked at each impossible situation and found in it a next step, and then a step after that. James Ape survived his injuries. The log recorded his recovery with the same clinical precision, and with one entry on day 47 that was not clinical at all. He is going to make it. He is going to make it, and we are going to get home. The belief was not naive. It was the conclusion of someone who had spent 47 days keeping a man alive with equipment rated for standard field emergencies, and who had done it, and who had updated her assessment of what was possible accordingly. They had done the impossible 47 times in 47 days. The next impossible was just the next step. The log ran for 60 years. Not every day. In some years, there were only 4 or 5 entries when the power conservation requirements were so tight that the writing itself had to be rationed. But it ran. It recorded the technical modifications and the failures and the solutions to the failures and the failures of the solutions and the solutions to those. It recorded the seasons of the debris field, the way the wreckage moved and settled and shifted over decades. It recorded James Ape's slow recovery and his help with the modifications and the years of working together in a space smaller than most people's living rooms. It recorded the birthdays they noted for the crew who had not made it to the pod, 11 names, spoken on 11 separate dates each year, because Nadia Osei believed that the names should be said, that the saying was the minimum that was owed. It recorded on page 207 a moment that Nadia read 3 times before she trusted that she was reading it correctly. Year 31. Nadia Osei wrote, "The power cell coupling failed tonight, complete failure. I have been sitting with this for 4 hours. James is sleeping. I have looked at every component in this pod and I cannot find a solution. I have been finding solutions for 31 years and I cannot find one tonight. I am going to sleep. In the morning I will look again. I have been wrong about what is possible before. I expect I will be wrong again." The next entry was the following morning. It said, "Found it." 2 words. But those 2 words, after reading 207 pages of a woman finding solutions for 31 years in a pod in the dark, hit Nadia with a force that she had not expected, and that she sat with for a moment before she continued reading. The warming protocols were working. On the medical monitor, the two life signs were strengthening, the metabolic rates climbing slowly toward normal ranges. 60 years of near hibernation did not unwrap quickly. Nadia had time to read. She read to the end. The final entry was dated 17 days ago, not 60 years ago, 17 days. Nadia Osei had been writing in this log 17 days ago, which meant that she was not in the condition of someone who had been asleep for decades. She was in the condition of someone who had been awake, working, surviving, and had 17 days ago done something that had put her into the slow state Nadia had found her in. The final entry said, "Power is at the threshold. I have done the calculation 20 times and the result is the same each time. The beacon will run for another 100 years on what we have built. The heating will run for another 30. The air recycler will run for another 50. James and I have what we need. But the modifications I made last week to improve the beacon's range required drawing from the thermal reserve that we use for metabolic regulation, and I made them anyway because if there is someone out there who is close enough, the stronger signal will reach them, and if there is someone out there, I want to be found before I am too old to tell the story. So I have reduced the thermal reserve. James and I will slow down. It is not dangerous. I have calculated the margin 6 times. We will slow down and the beacon will be stronger, and when someone comes, and someone will come, we will warm back up and we will be fine. I am leaving this entry last because I want whoever finds us to understand that what happened here was not a tragedy. We lost 12 people in 90 seconds and that was a tragedy, and I have carried it for 60 years and I will carry it until I am done. But what happened after that was not a tragedy. What happened after that was 2 people in a box in the dark deciding every single day that the next step was possible and finding out every single day that they were right. Whoever you are, whatever brought you to this frequency, thank you for coming. We have been ready to be found for a long time. Nadia put the log downs. On the medical monitor, Nadia Osei's vital signs had reached the lower edge of the normal range. Her eyes opened at 7:41 hours, in the amber light, in the pod that she had kept alive for 60 years, and the first thing she saw was a woman with the same family name reading her log in the cold. Amara looked at her for a moment. Then she said one word, not a question. A statement, the way you state something you have believed for 60 years and have just been proven right about. Found. Nadia transmitted the rescue report at 800 hours. The transmission went through the assembly relay network and reached the authorities' operations center 4 light hours later, where the duty officer read it and then read it again and then escalated it to the division director, who read it and immediately cleared his calendar for the rest of the day. The rescue report described 2 survivors of the Karev Expedition, alive after 60 years, in a secondary module that had been maintained and modified to sustain life by one of its occupants across the full duration of their absence. The report was accurate in every detail. It was also, the division director noted when he finished reading it, one of the most significant rescue cases in the authorities' recorded history. And it was significant not because of its duration or its medical improbability or its technical achievement, though it was all of those things. It was significant because of what it demonstrated at a scale that 60 years of daily evidence had produced, about what was possible when the person in the situation refused to accept the limit of what was possible and kept looking for the next step. The authorities sent a full medical vessel. It arrived 14 hours after Nadia's transmission. By then, both Nadia Osei and James Ake were conscious, warmed, stable, and had been briefed on the year 60 years of it, compressed into a conversation that Nadia had conducted with the specific care of someone who understands that receiving 60 years of news all at once requires a particular quality of attention from the person delivering it. They had asked questions. They had listened to the answers. They had been quiet for periods that Nadia respected without filling. And at one point, James Ape had looked at the medical monitor and at the pod's interior and at the log stacked on the console and had said quietly to Amara, "We actually did it." And she had looked back at him and said, "I told you we would." 60 years ago, in the first week, she had told him they would get home. She had been right. The rightness had required 60 years of daily proof, 60 years of modifications and failures and solutions, and the finding of solutions to the solutions' failures, 60 years of 11 names spoken on 11 dates each year, 60 years of two people in a box in the dark treating the next step as the only relevant question. But she had been right, and the rightness was complete, and the completion was its own kind of answer to every question about what human beings were capable of when the alternative to trying was to stop. The medical vessel's captain asked Nadia during the handover how she had found the signal, what had made her recognize the frequency. Nadia thought about her grandmother's kitchen table. She thought about a 9-year-old girl and an old woman and the names of people who had not come back, said in the voice of someone who had spent 40 years carrying the weight of not knowing. She thought about the footnote on page 41 of 47, buried in a closure report, written by someone who had noticed something and filed it and moved on Beck. As the investigation was closing, she thought about the fact that her grandmother had been supposed to be on that ship, had taken a different assignment 6 months before departure and had spent 60 years knowing this, and had told her granddaughter the frequency the way you tell someone something you cannot put down, hoping that the telling makes it lighter. Nadia told the captain, "I knew the frequency. Someone in my family made sure I would." The captain looked at her, then at the pod, then at the log which was being carefully catalogued by the medical team, 312 improvised pages plus 6 emergency notepads, the complete record of 60 years. He said, "That is a long time to trust that someone would come." Nadia said she did not trust that someone would come. She made sure someone would hear her when they did. There is a difference. Well, the captain thought about this. Then he said, "And the difference is." Nadia said one is hope, the other is engineering. She went back to the Meridian after the handover. She sat in the pilot's seat for a while before she set a heading. She thought about the log, about page 207 and the 2 words that followed the night of no solutions. Found it. About the final entry and the specific quality of a person who had decided, after 60 years of proving that the next step was always there, to make the beacon stronger so that whoever was close enough would hear it. Who had calculated the margins 6 times and made the modification anyway, because finding a solution that worked was not the same as finding the solution that reached furthest. She thought about her grandmother, who would be told this week that her cousin had been alive all along, that the names she had spoken for 60 years were not only the names of the lost, and that the weight she had been carrying had a different shape than she had believed. Nadia set the heading for the relay station. She had a report to file and a log to submit to the authorities' archive and a call to make to an old woman in Lagos who had sat at a kitchen table 32 years ago and explained to a 9-year-old what a frequency was and why it mattered and why she still remembered it. The call would be the hardest part, not because the news was bad, because 60 years of weight being set down takes a moment, and the moment was going to need to be held carefully, and Nadia was going to hold it. She was good at that. Her family had been good at it for a long time. The beacon on 847.3 megahertz went silent at 900 hours when the medical team deactivated it manually and transferred the power to the module's standard systems. After 60 years, 3 months, and 4 days, it stopped. Not because it had failed, because it had done exactly what it was built to do, because someone had heard it, because the hearing was the whole point and the point had been reached and the rest was just getting home. Which they did. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, share it with a fellow HFY fan, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss an upload. Your support keeps these stories coming.